All right, here we go, Aloha students. Glad you could be here today. Today we're going to discuss Constantine the Great as we sort of come to the end of our discussion about the Roman civilization, the Roman Empire. He's one of the really last major emperors of the Roman time period, the Roman Empire time period. He's very significant. A lot of the things he does has long-lasting effect and influence. I'm going to come back to this famous statue here as well. So we'll get back to that. Okay, so you can see the years he lived. You can see that we're getting, you can really sort of see here, we're getting further and further away from the life of Christ. Okay, we're moving on. The Roman Empire is not going to last much longer than this. About another 140 years or so after Constantine dies, the Roman Empire doesn't exist any longer. Why should we remember Constantine the Great? Well, he is the first ever Christian emperor of the Roman Empire. If you recall in our discussion yesterday we talked about how in Roman time period, Christianity was literally illegal. But you can see here, what has this guy done? He has become a Christian himself. And not only is he's not just some random Christian, he is the emperor himself. So he is the guy who is going to convert the society to Christianity. Now you may say, okay, well, why did he do this? Well, he did it, he said, because of something that happened in a civil war battle. So let me just briefly say this, and that was that before the switch over to empire, during the Republic period, there were not very many civil wars. Once Julius Caesar comes along and the society, the civilization converts to empireship, emperorship, oligarchyship, whatever you want to call it, there was lots of civil wars. And that's exactly what happened involving Constantine. He is going to lead his troops in a civil war in an attempt to become the emperor of Rome. And supposedly what happens is most people assume it happened the night before while he's sleeping, he has a dream. He has a vision. Something happens to him and he sees something. And the vision is of something, it's of a fiery red cross burning in the sky. All right, now, let's go through a couple things here. First of all, by this time, there's lots of Christians. It's still illegal. But everybody knew, whether the people were Christian or not, that the Christians had adopted the cross as their symbol. The Romans used the cross not just on Jesus, they used it all the time for their capital punishment, for putting people to death. The crucifixion was very common. Yesterday, and of course today, we were talking about Gladiator and all that stuff. Do you recall the name of a famous, I bet you do, because there's been a lot of miniseries movies recently about this guy. Do you recall the name of a famous gladiator who led a gladiator slave revolt during the time of the Roman Republic? I'll give you a little hint. It starts with an S. Do you recall the name of the gladiator who led a revolt, a slave revolt against the Romans? Yes, very good. His name was Spartacus. That is exactly correct. So my point of this whole story is that a lot of the gladiators/slaves that were finally captured after Spartacus's revolt were put to death on crosses as well. But the fact of the matter is what I'm getting at is that Constantine would have understood what this was. This was something having to do with Christianity, his dream. Now, he doesn't just have a dream. He just doesn't see things. The dream tells him something, and a voice says something to him in his dream. All right? And the voice says, "In this sign you will conquer." Okay? Now, the story goes, legend has it, that when Constantine wakes up the next morning and as his forces are getting ready for battle, he orders all of his troops to paint red crosses on their shields. So that day, as Constantine's forces are going to go into battle, his Roman troops all have red crosses on their shields. And that will last, that sort of concept will last even beyond the times of Constantine. And I should probably tell you that he is victorious that day. he is the winner, and he becomes the emperor of the Roman Empire. The force of Romans that he faced, the guy that he faced, they just made a bad move, and they made their stand with their backs to a river. And so when things went badly, the attempt by his enemies, the general who is his enemy, and those Roman troops, as they try to escape across a single bridge, which is disastrous, and a lot of those guys fall into the river. Even I believe the general he was fighting against falls into the river. A lot of them drown, but it's a resounding victory for Constantine. But he attributes his victory to the vision and the voice, and because of this, he basically converts. Although it's not super rapid, he converts to Christianity. Now he doesn't get baptized till he's on his deathbed. He slowly This is not an overnight deal, okay? He doesn't snap his fingers and the Roman civilization is suddenly Christian. It is a slow process. There's an element, it's a political process. You can't do things super fast always in political processes. But the fact of the matter is that he personally began practicing Christianity. He slowly converts the government. And therefore, what does this mean? This means that the illegality of Christianity is no longer. It becomes the tolerated and legalized within the society. Eventually, it will take over the government aspects of society as well. There are several things that this means. One of the things that it means is that property that had been seized from Christians over the years, remember there were some patricians who, for example, became Christian. That property could be returned through a legal process to the family of the descendants of the person who it was taken from over the course of the time that Christianity was illegal. Okay, so there's an element of this is called restitution. All right. The persecutions, okay, the feeding Christians to the lions type stuff. Okay, that's over and done with. They weren't going to do that anymore. There's an element of open practice which is now allowed. And probably this is the most significant thing of all. You can allow open practice because there is no fear involved. Now, the last time I told you the story of the spread of Christianity. I probably told you about something that you may not have heard of, and those were the catacombs of Rome. And if you recall, the catacombs of Rome were set up to practice Christianity in secret. Those were no longer needed. So the catacombs could be closed down. And if you recall, all of probably the one thing you probably remember about those pictures that I showed you of it more than anything else was the indentations in the walls, which I mentioned to you were used to store, for lack of a better way of putting it, dead bodies. Christians who had passed away, because the Romans cremated bodies. Christians didn't want to do that. So those were brought to the surface, and funeral rites were done in the ways that Christians wanted to do them. So the catacombs are no longer needed. Okay, so now let me give 4 sort of points of importance here that have to do with Constantine the Great and the things he did. Obviously, I think the biggest thing that you would have to say, more than anything else, is that Christianity is now really going to spread like wildfire. It was spreading anyway while it was illegal and people were scared. Now, when there was fear involved. Now there's no fear involved. How fast is Christianity going to spread? Well, obviously it's going to spread extremely fast. And of course, continue to be one of the great monotheistic religions, ultimately in modern times as well. Now, would somebody else have eventually legalized Christianity besides if Constantine the Great didn't come along? I think that's a legitimate argument to ask or to make. I think there's certainly a possibility that somebody else could have done this. But the fact still remains is that Constantine was the one who did it. Okay, here's something else we should sort of talk about. And this will influence Christianity as well. He splits the Roman Empire. In essence, he splits it in half.
And he does this, he claims, to make it easier to govern. And now, in essence, what you have to do is you have to imagine an empire that stretches from Spain in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. He literally takes a pen or a writing utensil and he makes a north-south line in between Italy and Greece. And now you've got two Roman empires. One is called the Western Roman Empire. And the Western Roman Empire has its own capital city. Obviously, it makes sense. We just keep the capital city at Rome. The other side is called the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, this is very interesting. Does anybody know the capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire? Well, it's in modern-day Turkey. It's still there. This big city is still there. It's not called what it was called anymore. It's got a new name. It's kind of up there on the entrance to the Black Sea, supposedly right around, sort of close to where Troy supposedly was. Does anybody know the name of this capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire? Let's see. Well, I'll give you a little hint. It was named after Constantine the Great. It was called Constantinople. It was really sort of called Constantinopolis. Remember, Polis, Constantinopolis. So we look back and we call it Constantinople. It's present day Istanbul in Turkey. All right. Okay, now, okay, very fascinating, Mr. O'Brien. What does that have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with my third point I'm going to make. And I'm going to revert back. Point one was about Christianity. Point three is going to be about Christianity as well. Okay, so here we go. Christianity is going to become the legal state religion of all of Rome. Rome is only going to sort of last another 150 years, however. And what happens is that the western half, about 150 years later, after Constantine passes away, it's really about 140 years, the western, it's about, so Christianity, my 150 number has to do with Christianity is legalized during the lifetime of Constantine the Great. The Roman Empire is going to basically fall. The Western Roman Empire, the western half, is going to fall in about 140 years. Okay, so now, what does this have to do with anything? What is my point? The fact of the matter is that the splitting of Rome is ultimately going to split Christianity as well. All right, now, what do I mean by this? Up until this time, from the life of Christ to this exact moment, there is one form of Christianity, only one. Now, you know that today there are different types of Christian churches out there. This is the first time at this exact moment, with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, in which Christianity has a split as well. That's my point. Have you heard the term, I know you have, Roman Catholics? Yes, this is the beginning of that. So if you've ever wondered, well, where does the term Roman Catholics come from? It comes from this. So Christians in the old Western Roman Empire become Roman Catholics. And Christians in the old Eastern Roman Empire become Eastern Orthodox Christians. All right? Now, the Roman Catholic Church will split again later, and we'll get to that later on in the discussions of this course. Eastern Orthodox Christianity has several different groups in it. For example, the two most well-known Orthodox Christian churches are the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. But my point is, now you sort of have two different ways to do your Christianity. Okay, so now let's move on to my discussion about that scene in the movie Gladiator that I asked you to pay very close attention to. So this is my fourth point. This is a point off of Christianity. Constantine does something else. He forces lower class people, all right? He forces lower class people to, what I say, be tied to the land by heredity. Okay, so now what does this mean? All right, so what you have to imagine is that, okay, what were the lower classes, the lower class in ancient Rome called? Well, they were called plebeians, tied to the land. So we think of landowners, the patricians. So the patricians needed workers to work the agricultural fields that they owned. Okay, these plebeians were, in essence, leaving the farms, just up and moving away from the farms. And what was happening is there was a labor shortage in agricultural work. And when there's a labor shortage in agricultural work, that means there's going to be a food shortage. And this is something that was happening for years and years and years leading up to Constantine. And Constantine says we've got to do something about the labor shortage of our agricultural work. Okay, we're going to make all these plebeians tied to the land by heredity. In other words, what this meant is that plebeians were no longer to freely move about. They couldn't leave the land that they worked on. They had to live there forever. Their children had to live there forever. In essence, their grandchildren, etc., had to live there forever. This creates a class of people. This is an additional class of people that at the very end of Rome, but the critical thing is that this class of people lasts way beyond the Roman Empire. These people were called serfs. Maybe that's a term you are familiar with. Serfs were agricultural workers who were virtually, they were in perpetual servitude to the landowner where they lived. Were they slaves? Virtually. They had ways to make income that we'll eventually talk about, but when we don't think of slaves as earning income. But virtually, there's no freedom in the life of a serf. Now, why were plebeians leaving? Okay, why were the plebeians leaving the farmland? Okay, well, where were they going? They were moving to the cities. They were getting off of the agricultural farms. They were leaving it. They were out of there. They wanted nothing to do with it anymore. Why would they move to the cities? Okay, well, here's your hint: enjoy. The hint is the word enjoy. Okay, so think about it now. We just covered this. What's going on in the cities? And not just Rome, all the major cities of the Roman Empire have these situations going on. It has to do with games. Recall what I just said as we've led up to this discussion. The games would run for 100 days in a row, 150 days in a row. They would not just be for a couple hours a day. They would be all day long. And don't forget, they were free of charge. So these people, these plebeians are saying, well, we can just go get entertained at the games all day and have something to do all day. We don't even need to worry about anything because guess what else they did? Well, what scene did I ask you to look at? What was being thrown into the crowd? Well, what was being thrown into the crowd was bread, wasn't it? So we call this bread and circus. They were leaving the agricultural areas to go enjoy what was known as bread and circus. Now, what does bread and circus mean? Well, don't forget this building, the Circus Maximus. You recall this? So the Circus Maximus, the chariot race stadium, free of charge. The entertainment was free of charge. This was part of the games that the Roman plebeians were enjoying. And remember, these are all free. These were at the Colosseum and at the Circus Maximus. These things were all free of charge. Okay, so now let's go back to this briefly, and you're going to probably get a copy of this yourself. This is the famous what was known as the Colossus of Constantine. The Colossus of Constantine was a big, huge statue of him. We have a number of pieces remaining. You can go see this if you go visit Rome. It's in a very specific museum right there. So all that's left is the head. There's an elbow. There is some parts of the leg. There's this hand, of course. And obviously the head is the key thing. So when it's all put together, most people think, based on the pieces that are remaining, this is what the Colossus of Constantine probably looked like. There are estimates, let's see, my estimates are, I think I have this written down. The estimates are that this might have been as big as 40 feet tall. Made out of marble, mostly. The head and the torso was probably wood and brick, and then it had, was probably draped with something over the top. To give you some scale, 40 feet tall. The Lincoln Memorial is about half that. So Abe Lincoln sitting in the chair is only about 20 feet tall. One other last thing I want to show you. I always show you this picture of the Colosseum right here. Okay, if you take a look at that, you see this thing right here. What is that? Well, that is the Arch of Constantine right there. That is the Arch of Constantine. This is the thing that commemorates his great victory at the bridge in which he became, allowed him to become emperor. The fantastic victory that all had to do with his vision of a fiery burning red cross in the sky and the voice telling him, in this sign you will conquer. The Arch of Constantine commemorates that. All right, everybody, there you have it, the story of Constantine the Great.